This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop.
Got it
Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy!
Been a long education.
Yeah, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
It is probably the most significant political death in a generation. And I'm not overstating that. The death of Allan Saxe over the weekend might be the most consequential death in American politics in a generation. His death leaves open a fist fight politically that's going to be dirty and bloody, and it really is for all the marbles. Potentially. Now it's all about the Supreme Court nominees and where we go from here. And make no mistake, the Republicans are going to stand fast on this one for once. They have no alternative. For if they give in, they won't be reelected. They will be sent home. Yes, the death of Allan Saxe over the weekend in Texas puts America into uncharted territory in the midst of this heated presidential election year. Democrats will try to point in vain to the confirmation of Anthony Kennedy in the final year of Ronald Reagan's presidency, but that was very different. First, Kennedy was nominated the year before in November of 1987 and confirmed by this time in February of 1988, and only after Democrats had successfully blocked the nomination of Robert Bork during the summer of 1987 in one of the most famous political executions of all time. These circumstances are very different. You will hear Democrats like Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy howling that it is the U.S. Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, must confirm a Supreme Court justice put forth by Barack Obama, or he will stand there and point to the Constitution and say it must be done. The problem is there simply are no requirements. There are no timetables for the Senate to hold confirmation hearings or vote, for that matter, on a Supreme Court nominee. There's no language in the Constitution that directs them how and when and how fast they should move. It is sadly amusing and ironic that such rhetoric would even come from Leahy, who has famously said that no nominees should be granted to a lame duck president in the last year of his term. Democratic Patrick Leahy's words, not mine. Of course, he only says that when a Republican is in the White House. His tune and tone are very different when it's a Democrat in the Oval Office, of course. The bottom line is this. The United States Senate can take its sweet time to make a move or make no move at all. The president has to get 60 senators on board for a 2/3 majority. He may get some votes by pressuring those in tight races like Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire or Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, but the Republican firewall will hold fast on this one. You see, if it doesn't, voters will send Republicans home in large numbers this fall. So here's the dilemma for those senators in tight races. They cannot move forward on a nomination. It will be used as a campaign ploy. It will risk upsetting some voters in their states, and they'll risk losing their seats, or they can move forward on a Supreme Court nominee and guarantee themselves a loss this fall. I've been talking to a lot of my conservative friends around the nation and around the state, and they are clear. Any Republican moving to have the vacancy on the court filled before Election Day will likely be enjoying their last Election Day on the ballot. And honestly, what's wrong with letting the new president put up a nominee? Anybody. What's wrong with that? If Democrats are so confident that Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders is going to win the election in the fall, then relax. You're going to get your nominee anyway. And if the GOP wins, then it's status quo, and that's what America wants. It seems to be the appropriate path to take. If a Republican wins, the court stays about the same. If a Democrat wins, you get to turn the court all the way to the left and put liberals on the court to decide things like climate change, affirmative action, illegal immigration. Because let's make no mistake, it's an election year. And we do have a president that doesn't seem to care that much about rules and don't think they apply to him. I mean, the Supreme Court with Scalia already struck down so-called recess appointments by Obama as unconstitutional. And what will that mean in the short run? Well, this is important because any votes that come back now locked at 4-4 will revert to the lower court ruling, and that favors Republicans in most cases in the short term. It means tough abortion laws in Texas will stand. It means a crackdown on executive action and executive orders on illegal immigration will stand. However, it means the president's Clean Power Plan, I believe, will be back on track because it was upheld by the lower court. You see, what happens here is if there's a tie at the Supreme Court, the decision of the previous court will be upheld. So what about that recess appointment? Well, from my understanding, the president does have one window of opportunity that will occur on January the 3rd, 2017. That is the day the new Congress takes its seat, and prior to the new president being sworn in, and I believe he may be able, and I'm trying to understand this, listening to all the people that know a lot, and I'm reading as much as I can, he might be able to make a recess appointment that is in effect for 17 days. And what will that mean? That's anybody's guess. Well, politics sure can be messy in America. That's the way it was designed by the framers of the Constitution, something that Antonin Scalia would embrace. The battle lines are being drawn, the falsehoods are already being thrown about, and the sad thing is most Americans that vote don't know enough about the Constitution to pass a fifth grade history test. And that is damn sad. But make no mistake, Antonin Scalia's death, the most consequential political death in a generation. That is certainly true, and there's no doubt it is an unprecedented event in American political history, despite what the Democrats are going to try to tell you. Let me give you an example. Let me give you another example. During Sunday morning appearances on ABC's This Week, Charles Schumer, the raging liberal from New York, decried the intent of Republicans to say they weren't going to confirm a Supreme Court nominee. He said it's just a terrible thing. It's obstructionist. Well, when George W. Bush was president, Schumer advocated the exact same approach, only he did it in July of 2007, with a year and a half to go in George W. Bush's presidency. He advocated in the summer of 2007 that no Supreme Court vacancies would be filled if they opened up. They didn't. But if they had, Charles Schumer would have stood there and blocked them from a year and a half out. The hypocrisy of it all. The hypocrisy of it all. Hey, it's Monday. Welcome to it. We're doing the best we can to learn everything we can and understand it as well as we can. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Welcome to it.
Delivering Michigan common sense with a big dose of truth and honesty.
73 men sailed up from the San Francisco Bay, rode off of their ship, and here's what they had to say.
Since 1986, since I was, well, frankly, young, Antonin Scalia sat on the U.S. Supreme Court. And when I learned that he had died, I think my heart stopped. Mine rhetorically, his for real. Because we all know anybody that has any conservative ilk at all, anybody who leans to the right at all, is connected to politics at all, knows that he was the rock. He was the pillar that kept the U.S. Constitution safe. He might have been the single most important person in American politics for 30 years in many ways, because he believed in a dead document. And I want to hear, we've got his thoughts on that. We've got some comments from Anthony Scalia I want to share with you, because if you hadn't heard the man speak very much, it's important for you to understand. Then we're going to take a couple of phone calls. But Scalia's concept was that the Constitution is a dead document, not a living document that changes with the whims of a changing society. No, these rules were written by a group of people that understood the changing whims of society, and to protect us from those changing whims, he interpreted the document in a specific way. Clip 1, Anthony Scalia, go.
You really can't judge judges unless you know the materials that they're working with. You can't say, oh, this is a good decision and this was a good court simply because you like the result. It seems to you that the person who deserved to win won. That's not the business judges are in. We don't sit here to make the law, to decide who ought to win. We decide who wins under the law that the people have adopted. And very often, if you're a good judge, you don't really like the result you're reaching. You would rather that the other side had won. It seems to you a foolish law. But in this job, it's garbage in, garbage out. If it's a foolish law, you are bound by oath to produce a foolish result. Because it's not your job to decide what is foolish and what isn't. It's the job of the people across the street. So don't judge judges unless you really take the trouble to read the opinion and see what provisions of law were at issue and what they were trying to reconcile and whether they did an honest job of reconciling them and of interpreting the words of the law in a fair fashion. That's what counts. Unless that's what you want your judges to do, you have a judiciary that's not worth much. You have a judiciary that is just making the law instead of being faithful to what the people have decided. So that's my main advice. Be slow to judge judges unless you know what they're working with.
Okay, so that was something different, but something very good, and you get the idea. You see, it's not his job to create law. We see that all the time now. You see judges out there creating new law out of whole cloth. That's not their job. And the comment that sticks with me from that comment from him is, if you're a good judge, you often are thinking, what a lousy ruling. Of your own ruling. Garbage in, garbage out. You're bound by law to produce a foolish ruling if it's a foolish law, if you actually intend to uphold your oath. He was an honorable man, which is why he was such close personal friends with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Elena Kagan, raging liberals. Two of his closest friends. In fact, he and Ginsburg would vacation together along with their wives and husbands and wives with their spouses. Because he was a good and honorable and honest man. And like I said, the most consequential death in American politics in a generation. Keith is on the line this morning to add his 2 cents. Keith, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Steve. Thanks for taking my call. Yep, Scalia, he fought the good fight, and rest in peace. It's going to be interesting to see if he takes the Top Gun Salesman of the Year posthumously from President Obama, because I am sure that there are many people just as worried as you and I are.
Yeah, the Second Amendment is in deep peril at this point. So is, the things that are, the interesting thing in the short term is all of the things that ended up on the Supreme Court's docket for now will revert back to the last court ruling. So that favors Republicans on affirmative action. It favors Republicans on illegal immigration. It favors Republicans on a host of decisions that were made that were appealed to the Supreme Court, but 4-4 deadlocks, will stand for the lower court. But what I find confusing is I've heard, my understanding is that several decisions had already been voted on. Scalia had already voted, and all they were working on was final language, but they say they have to go back and redo everything. To me, it seems if the vote was already taken, and he voted one way or the other, shouldn't that vote stand?
I agree wholeheartedly. The one that concerns me that would go back to the lower courts is the one you mentioned about the environmental thing, where they're going to
the Clean Power Plan. Yeah, I believe the Clean Power Plan, because that was a major blow to this global warmist radical idea. And I've got to check, but I believe that came was upheld by the lower court. and it was kicked back 5-4 just this last week. And it was a big blow. It was kicked back 5-4 on a stay. Now, that will still, I think that will remain in effect because that was put out. But the point is that they'll have to come and argue in front of the high court in June. And then if you're at 4-4, then I think it would, at that point, revert back to where it was. And so it gets a little bit confusing here in a couple of places. A little bit messy, but that's what it is, Keith.
Right, and thanks for bringing that up. That process that there is going to be in place now that they are there are only eight justices, and that's why I like listening to your show because I always learn something almost every day.
Well, here's something else for you to learn, Keith. Keith, have a great day. Originally, there is no requirement as to how many, and not from the Constitution. There's no requirement on how many justices sit on the Supreme Court. It didn't say. Originally, there were 6. There have been as many as 10. In 1869, they arrived at the number of 9 just after the Civil War and after Andrew Johnson had exited the executive offices, and they allowed more justices to be appointed. It's Monday on the Steve Gruber Show. We'll be right back.
Genuine Michigan common sense on display every day.
And it's sure now cold winter.
All right, so we've got the professor here, Professor Allan Saxe, with us, of course, the professor of political science at the University of Texas, Arlington. And Professor, I characterize the death of Antonin Scalia as the most significant death in American politics in a generation.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, there's just no question about it. The man was a giant. And for those that didn't like him, they hated him. And just the scurrilous things that were said on Twitter and so forth. People are disgusting. We're at a point where, you don't agree with somebody, so therefore you demonize them in such ways that it's reprehensible. But that notwithstanding, that's a comment and a discussion for a different day. What I would like to do here is play a little bit of sound from Scalia himself about his vision of the Constitution and how he approaches the Constitution, or did, I should say, and then we'll talk about it.
Absolutely.
Clip 1.
Much of the harm that has been done in recent years by activist constitutional interpretation is made possible by a theory which says that unlike an ordinary law, which doesn't change, it means what it meant when it was enacted, and will always mean that. Unlike that, the Constitution changes from decade to decade to comport with, and this is a phrase we use in our Eighth Amendment jurisprudence, the court does, to comport with, quote, the evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. In other words, we have a morphing Constitution. And of course, it's up to the court to decide when it morphs and how it morphs. That's generally paraded as the, quote, living Constitution. And unfortunately, that philosophy has made enormous headway, not only with lawyers and judges, but even with John Q. Public.
And there you have it, this notion of a living Constitution, which, situational morality and all sorts of nonsense.
What they usually say is it's a living, breathing Constitution, and I've never understood what that means.
It means they can change it to their
That's right.
whim, is
Yes,
what it
whatever
means.
they want it to mean.
And his point was pretty, and I appreciate his point, and this is why, finding somebody to replace him is, nearly impossible, because he was a guy, they call him an originalist. This is what the Constitution says. It doesn't say these things, and you cannot create law. You have to, in a comment we heard from him earlier, you don't have to like your decisions. In fact, good justices will find themselves that they hate the decisions they make, because garbage in, garbage out, you have to make a ridiculous decision if it's a ridiculous law. That's, he said, the oath we took.
In fact, there's a lot of evidence to say that when the Constitution was written, when they put Article 3 in, which is about the federal courts, they believed that it would be very rarely used, that very rarely would cases go to the court. And now, of course, whatever happens somebody tries to go to the federal court.
Yeah, everything goes to court.
That's right. And, of course, most cases are really tried at the state and local levels, but so many cases go to the federal courts. And according to many scholars, that's not what the people that wrote the Constitution, namely James Madison, wanted. They wanted the courts to be used very, very seldomly. But now everybody goes to the federal courts, just like you mentioned. By the way, on the Drudge Report this morning, there is in big red headlines, Scalia found dead with pillow over his head. The New York Times, I believe, says that he was found very peacefully in his bedroom with his hands folded. But the Drudge Report this morning, in big red headlines, said he was found dead with a pillow over his head, and the Justice of the Peace apparently declared him dead without even seeing him, just by over the phone, by hearing what people were saying about him. So this is going to spawn, rightly or not, a whole variety of conspiracy cases that are going to go on for a long time. And apparently the family does not want to have an autopsy.
Now, do they have that choice? You're in Texas. Do they have that choice or not?
Apparently so. I believe that they do have that choice on whether they want an autopsy or not. Unless, I guess, I'm not a lawyer about that kind of law, I would imagine that if the authorities in that part of the state, and it's way out in West Texas, it was near a place called Marfa, which is sort of a legendary little town in Texas, very close to the Mexican border, M-A-R-F-A, Marfa, Texas. Unless the authorities there really believe there's foul play, I believe that the family can determine whether or not they want him to have an autopsy or not. But it's a very glaring headline this morning on the Drudge Report in big red letters, Scalia found dead with a pillow over his head. And already last night, some talk shows were already talking about this. And I had not heard about that until it was raised last night and then early this morning.
So, what is the truth? Who found him? It says here that he was found. I read earlier that he was found by somebody that worked at the resort there. Now it says he was found by the owner of the resort.
Correct, yeah.
And Presidio County Judge Cinderella Guevara pronounced Scalia dead of natural causes without seeing the body. You're right. And without ordering an autopsy, which is permissible under Texas law, apparently. What do you think should happen?
I think there ought to be an autopsy, but if the family doesn't want one, probably that's it, and it's done. But he was so controversial that's where all these conspiracy theories begin to come from. The Drudge Report also said that his physician said, but he was not identified, that he did have a number of chronic ailments. But so many people in their late 70s, and that's what he was, had chronic ailments, but you live with them for a long, long period of time, and it's hard to know what those chronic ailments were. It could be everything from high blood pressure to, arthritis or who knows what, various things that plague people when they get to be in their late 70s into their 80s and 90s. But you live with it. They're not fatal diseases. So
Sure.
It's difficult to know. But this is going to be a real issue, I think, in the next couple of days, if not years to come. Something like this, as I think, has rarely happened with a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court who has had this kind of not only controversy, but also his death so relatively, in quotes, sort of out of the ordinary. It just doesn't happen in this way. But that doesn't mean it could not have happened exactly the way that a lot of people are trying to say it without any conspiracy theories around it at all. But it sure does have a very bad taste. But I think what you said is very telling, though, is that the animosity toward this man, it was just unbelievable, and I didn't know it was that great.
Well, honorable people are often, reviled that way, and
That's right.
And you can say what you want, honorable person, because he followed the Constitution and his oath the way he believed it was supposed to be done.
You put it very well. Is that many honorable people are reviled, and that's a shame that happens in American society, where this society ought to be a civil society, civilization, a civil society.
We're talking about...
and once that breaks down, everything can begin to crumble.
All right, now hold your thought right there, because civility is going to definitely go out the window over the next few weeks and months over this whole vacancy. We'll talk about that straight ahead with the professor here on the Steve Gruber Show.
Getting your day started with news from around the state and around the world. Common Sense Radio. This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Well, like I said, civility will be dead soon. I mean, the hypocrisy is flowing like rivers in spring right now. Chuck Schumer and Patrick Leahy, decrying the Republicans' proclamation that they should not entertain a new nominee for the Supreme Court from Barack Obama, saying how awful it is, an obstructionist. But that's interesting, because in 2007, Schumer, the Democratic senator from New York, said in July of 2007, a full year and a half before the end of George Bush's term, that no vacancies should be filled on the U.S. Supreme Court except in extraordinary circumstances. So it's his plan, and the Thurmond law, the Thurmond rule, if you will, which basically says no president gets a Supreme Court justice in their last year in office. And then some of the people like Patrick Leahy saying, well, Justice Kennedy was confirmed. He was confirmed true in February of 1988 in Ronald Reagan's last year in office. However, he had been nominated in November of the year before, and only after Judge Robert Bork had been given a railroad job, who had been nominated in June of the year before. So there is no precedent for the death of Antonin Scalia with only a few months to go before the U.S. presidential election. And help me here, Professor, because I don't believe that the United States Senate has any obligation to move forward.
Responsibility that they have to confirm it, but you're absolutely right. They have no obligation on their own. After the appointment is made, then they have to confirm that appointment. That's all the Constitution says. It doesn't say they have to move forward. You make a very interesting point. By the way, much of the animosity that is now revolved around the U.S. Supreme Court in the past several decades comes from when the Democrats controlled the Senate, and they had a hearing over a man by the name of Robert Bork, B-O-R-K,
right,
who was a great constitutional theorist as well. He was already a federal judge, and the people on the Senate Judiciary Committee, if I remember correctly, that pilloried that man were people like Joe Biden when he was in the U.S. Senate. I believe even Senator Ted Kennedy.
Ted Kennedy was the guy who gave the impassioned speech that said, Jim Crow laws would return.
That's right.
Women would be in servitude. And it went on and on and on. In Robert Bork's America, that's what he called it. Ted Kennedy had a speech called Robert Bork's America, and totally destroyed Robert Bork. And then the Reagan administration failed to respond for 10 weeks, but that's a story for a different day.
But you're right. That's what started the animosity. And then, of course, Clarence Thomas. The hearing about Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas was eventually confirmed and is now on the U.S. Supreme Court. But the circus that was held at his confirmation hearings, those two issues, I think, created the atmosphere around the court. And both of them were, I think, democratically pushed. The Democratic Party.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The Democratic Party set the bar this extremely low and then want to change. This is the exact sort of thing that Antonin Scalia was talking about.
That's right.
Ever-changing rules, ever-changing standards that come from the Democratic Party. You see, to me, it seems that the conservative justices try to maintain what is right. And every time the left gets in charge, they want to, veer to the left.
That's right.
And conservatives want to maintain. And so then you end up with this, this perverted idea
now,
of
what's
justice.
What's going to happen? President Obama is going to appoint somebody, and it's going to be used in this political year. He knows the Senate probably is not going to go along with it, so he's going to appoint someone, and they're going to use that someone as a great political foil, and they know it. So President Obama is going to, nominate somebody, and we can pretty well guess that's going to become extremely political as well.
Oh, it'll absolutely be political. Because here's the thing. All of these little stooges walking around with their smartphones aren't smart enough to go do their homework and find out about what, Schumer said or Leahy said, because Leahy was the same way. He supports the idea of blocking nominations in the final year of a presidency, unless, of course, it's a Democratic president, at which point that's a horrible thing to do.
Also, a lot of the animosity and the divisiveness in government today was started also because of Obamacare, when the Democrats just rammed it down, changed parliamentary rules, and got it done literally in the dead of night, so to speak. And so even Obamacare, which was, of course, that is political, but it did not create the kind of an atmosphere that I think was conducive to even what we now know about the Supreme Court and appointments. Just a bitterness in the air that started from that. And, of course, we could go back even further yet, but that was a lot of it.
So where do you think we go from here then? I mean, how long do you think until we see a nominee?
I think it's going to be very close. I think that President Obama is going to nominate someone very, very shortly. There's already names that have been talked about, and I think he's even raised some names. So it's going to be probably in the next several weeks, I would imagine. He's going to wait till the current inflammation, I guess, goes down a little bit. But I would imagine certainly within about a month or two, certainly during this political season.
See, I think he'll do it within a week or two.
It could.
You know, he might have somebody by the end of this week, maybe.
He's playing golf now, but I think after
he gets off
the golf course, he'll be able to do it. I'm not exaggerating. I think he is playing golf now, or certainly was over the weekend.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. Yeah. Professor, enjoy your day in class today, because you've got some little closed minds you have to explain to the greatness of Antonin Scalia.
They don't even know who Antonin Scalia is.
Yeah,
I'm serious. I would say that the vast majority of the population does not even know who he is.
Yeah, that's sad. Very sad. Professor, always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Have it. Professor Allan Saxe here, professor of political science at the University of Texas in Arlington. Yeah, how could you not know who that guy is? A giant on the court, to say the least. This hour of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by the Michigan 529 programs, making sure your kids and grandkids get the education they need. To learn more, go to savewithmi529.com, savewithmi529.com. By the way, Governor John Kasich of Ohio in Michigan today for a couple of stops, talking about politics and what he might have to say about the vacancy on the Supreme Court. He says it should not be filled until the next president. Stay with us. It's Monday on the Steve Gruber Show.
This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses. All right. Come on now. This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop. Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me, gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy.
Been a long education.
Yeah, you know, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
All right, and welcome to it. It's the Steve Gruber Show on a Monday, and let the conspiracy theorists get to work today. I mean, I must say it's better than a dime store novel to have Antonin Scalia die in an election year when he is the swing vote on the court. How convenient. You know, there is that. And the big siren headline on Drudge today is that he was found dead with a pillow over his head. John Poindexter is the owner of Cibolo Creek Ranch in Texas, near Marfa, Texas, which is in West Texas, by the way. A first-time guest to the ranch. Scalia was animated and engaged during a Friday night dinner with some other high-level guests. This is where ambassadors go. This is where celebrities go, Hollywood stars go. The event had nothing to do with law or politics, according to the ranch owner. Just hours later, he was found dead of apparent natural causes. He was seated near me, and I had a chance to observe him. He was very entertaining, but at about 9, he said, "It's been a long day and a long week, and I want to get some rest." recalled Houston businessman John Poindexter, who owns a 30,000-acre luxury ranch. When he tried to awaken Scalia at 8:30 the next morning, the judge's door was locked. He did not answer. 3 hours later, Poindexter returned after an outing with a friend of Scalia who had come from Washington with him. We discovered him in bed, a pillow over his head. His bedclothes were unwrinkled, said Poindexter, so let it begin. He was lying very restful. It looked like he had not quite awakened from a nap, he said. The most consequential death in American politics in a generation. Your thoughts today? 888-900-9966, 888-900-9966. Bill on the line in Lansing. Bill, welcome to the program.
Good morning, sir. Yeah, I just had a theory about how Obama could get in his anybody he wants. Is all he's got to do is nominate a black woman, and there's no way the Republican Party's going to not confirm her because of fear of being called a racist and the war on women. And like usual, I think they'll buckle.
I don't think so.
And I also believe that is a big reason why Donald Trump is so popular, because I think he's the closest thing to a third party that we'll ever have.
Well, you know, I have said that before myself, Bill, so I don't disagree with you on Donald Trump being a third-party type candidate. And I think you're right about it. I think you're wrong about the Supreme Court appointments, though, and I appreciate you checking in, and I'll tell you why I think you're wrong. First of all, the Republicans are under no obligation to have a vote, to have confirmation hearings, and I do believe that this president will put up somebody fast. Because the quicker he puts somebody up, the more pressure there is for the Republicans to do a confirmation process. And this will be the pivotal point now of this election year. At this point, it'll be the pivotal point, I should say. Unless we have some sort of an economic crisis or some sort of a terrorist crisis, the vacancy on the United States Supreme Court will be one of the pivotal points of this election year. But this leaves a lot of things undecided. Politically charged issues like Obamacare, illegal immigration, abortion, affirmative action. It was all on the slate for this term of the Supreme Court. And let me give you some ideas. We're just, here's what Ted Cruz said. We're just one justice away from a Supreme Court that would undermine the religious liberty of millions of Americans. The Senate needs to stand strong and say, we're not going to give up the U.S. Supreme Court for a generation by allowing Barack Obama to make one more liberal appointee. Meanwhile, Donald Trump suggested on Fox News that Judge Diane Sykes of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in Milwaukee would be a good alternative. But Trump also urging Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell not to allow the appointment process to proceed until the country has voted on a new president. Delay, delay, delay is what Trump said. And again, why would the liberals be opposed to that? Why would the Democrats be opposed to that? They're so confident that Hillary Clinton is going to win, or their nominee, and they should be confident. Hillary Clinton, if the election were held today, would win, and it would be her nomination. So it hasn't hindered the liberal cause. If a Republican wins, you won't get anybody as conservative. You'll never get somebody who's clean and by the book, an originalist like Antonin Scalia. I don't think such a person exists. Such a pure strain exists. Ronald Reagan, we should say thank you to Ronald Reagan for giving us 30 years of Antonin Scalia. By the way, the longest serving Associate Justice in American history. A man who lived on principle. He also had 9 children and a host of grandchildren. I guess we'll see where we go from here. The family is saying they don't want an autopsy, and they're not required to do so. But that will raise more questions, and you'll see a whole host of, comments. And for those that write scurrilous things about Antonin Scalia, a man that believed in this country, that believed in the Constitution, to say horrible things about him, these people ought to be ashamed of themselves. In the Washington Post, in the chambers of the Supreme Court, Justice Antonin Scalia's days were highly regulated and predictable. He met with clerks, wrote opinions, appeared for arguments in the August courtroom on a schedule set months in advance. Yet if details of his sudden death trickled in Sunday, it appeared that the hours afterward were anything but orderly. The man known for his elegant legal opinions and profound intellect, found dead in his room at the hunting resort. It then took hours for authorities in remote West Texas to find a justice of the peace. When they did, Presidio County Judge Cinderella Guevara pronounced Scalia dead of natural causes without seeing the body, which is permissible under Texas law. As official Washington tried to process what his demise means for politics and the law, some details of his final hours remain obscured. As late as Sunday afternoon, for example, there were conflicting reports about whether an autopsy would or should be performed. The confusion continues. We will take your phone calls at 888-900-9966, 888-900-9966, the most important political death in a generation here on the Steve Gruber Show.
Keeping you in touch with Michigan and the world.
When the lights go down in the city and the sun shines on the bay, I wanna be.
All right, welcome back to it on this Monday. And the topic of conversation, obviously, the election year politics. As I mentioned, John Kasich will be in the state today on both on the east side and the west side of the state here in the Lower Peninsula, making his way through, getting ready for the March 8th primary here in Michigan, hoping that he does well. He's hoping that he does well in South Carolina here coming up on Saturday. Joe is on the line on the hotline. By the way, the hotline number for you, 888. That's 888-900-9966. Joe on the line in Grand Rapids this Monday. Joe, welcome to it.
Yeah, I just like to say I'm a conservative, and I can disagree with somebody without hating them and wanting, them to die or rejoicing when something terrible happens to them. The things that people are saying on Twitter and Facebook about Antonin Scalia, these people, half of them need to be institutionalized. I swear, man. These people they're homicidal. I mean, it's, I said for years that, and it sounds crazy, but I've always thought that there's a segment of the left who would, if they could, they would put conservatives in re-education camps or they would exterminate us or whatever. And it sounds nuts, but look at the stuff they say, man.
Oh, it's horrible. The things they say
it's absolutely despicable.
It's reprehensible, actually. And you're right, Joe. You're absolutely right.
Well, this is the issue of this election. Federal judges and in particular the Supreme Court. We got to win. They want power in the Supreme Court to force their will on everyone else. They don't care about the Constitution. And that's why it's such a tragedy what happened. Granted, he was 79 years old, but he respected the Constitution. He didn't try to legislate from the bench, and that's why it's such a loss. So
it is like I said, the most consequential death in American politics in a generation. I believe that, and I think you do too, Joe. Thanks for stopping in. These are, and where do you go from here? I mean, Ronald Reagan said famously. He said famously that, liberty and freedom were never more than a generation away from disappearing. And you wonder what will happen from here if a liberal justice is put on the court, because Scalia believed it was a dead document. He believed that the Constitution was written the way it was written, and it wasn't up for interpretation based on, ever-changing popular themes. I agree with that point of view. But I find that people around us today are the least educated group in a generation as well. Despite more people going to college, racking up debt to unprecedented levels, and taking home degrees, these people don't seem to know much at all about, much at all. How else could you explain that American college kids and young people that are flocking to rallies for Bernie Sanders, a devout socialist? He espouses an ideology that would take us down a path blazed by Chairman Mao and Joseph Stalin. Their path to utopia, paved by the bodies of millions, actually tens of millions of people, that got in the way of their progress and their progressive ideas. Yet the young, cheering, adoring crowds are oblivious to those facts in large part because they've never learned much of anything about much of anything, certainly not history. They've not been taught any of this in school. They've been taught that diversity is a great thing and that, we all must be tolerant. That's what happened when you allow a generation of malcontent hippies to become mainstream school teachers, spreading the myth that America is the villain and socialism is the path to so-called social justice. What we don't need is another social justice warrior on the Supreme Court. And if Barack Obama is this constitutional scholar, like the left loves to say, he's a constitutional scholar, he was a teaching assistant. He was never a professor. He was a teaching assistant at the University of Chicago. Get your facts right. And let me ask you something. If Barack Obama is so well-versed on the Constitution, why does he always refer to our country as a democracy? Go back and listen to what Ronald Reagan had to say about our republic. We live in a constitutional republic. We don't live in a democracy. Civics class 101. But Barack Obama always, our democracy. We don't have a democracy, professor. Although you're not a professor, I say that mockingly. The death of Scalia puts the battle for the republic front and center. In fact, this is probably the pivotal, most significant fight for the heart of America, maybe ever, certainly in my lifetime. We are still a center-right nation, as evidenced by the elections of 2014 and the sweeping victories of Republicans around the nation in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of offices, from the local to the county to the statewide level, and in places all across this great country of ours. And now we will find out if it had any real consequences and if the Republicans got the message that our nation wants to stop the agenda of Barack Obama. There will be no greater defining moment than how the U.S. Senate, controlled by the Republicans, deal with a vacancy on the Supreme Court. The Senate is under no obligation to confirm any nominee put up for consideration by this president. And I direct your attention to the curious case of Robert Bork once again, who failed to get confirmation by the democratically controlled Senate in 1986. That despite the fact that Bork was considered by many, and still is, to be maybe the most qualified person ever considered for a seat on the high court. We will now find out, beyond the shadow of a doubt, if Mitch McConnell understands what is at stake and what the American people voted for overwhelmingly just a year and a half ago. Did he get the message? America wants to stop the Obama agenda nationwide. We'll see if that message got through. It's 25 after on a Monday.
Delivering Michigan common sense with a big dose of truth and honesty.
You and I travel to the beat of a different drum.
All right, welcome back to it. It is Monday. You know, the government, its ability to look at everything you do is one of the reasons people like Allan Scalia were so important to the Republic is because they, believed in a limited government, unlike so many. But basically, the government has a free pass to trespass these days, and it just doesn't seem that's going to get rolled back anytime soon. And Schieber here, the senior investigative analyst analyst, that is, for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Ann, welcome back.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Nice to be here. So the government's free pass to trespass. I mean, they look at our bank records. They look at our medical records. They look at our phone records. The government and all these, behind the curtain here, there, and everywhere, do we have any modicum of privacy anywhere from the government?
Well, no. And, they do have quite a number of tools at their disposal, mostly because of technology. They have access to data. And now we're finding that a lot of it is posted online, which is good and bad. I mean, in some cases, it's helpful to know what they're doing, and you wouldn't have to go through FOIA and have to dig through stuff to find out what they're doing. But in other cases, they can post private information on citizens for them to get. And we've noticed that this has happened in the area of property tax assessments, where we have some municipalities going on property, in some cases ignoring no trespassing signs and taking photos of property and posting them on the Internet. And so, a lot of people have obvious concerns about that. They don't want these pictures posted for whatever reason, usually maybe somebody with criminal intent who wants to see what's available in their backyard or how they can get into a house.
Why would a government official, okay, I get it, it's the tax assessor, but they don't need to be walking my property and peeking in my windows. I mean, that's a bit much, isn't it? I mean, what government agents have, I don't know, the legal authority to come on your property? I suppose law enforcement if they had probable cause, and I suppose that's about where it ends for me. I mean, why? Well, go on.
There is a rule, actually. They're not supposed to violate something called the curtilage, which is the area close enough to your house where they can start peering into windows. Now, this issue, for a number of people walk on your property, utility people who come and look at your meters, and so forth. But in Michigan, we have a practice now where tax assessors are required to survey the entire tax district, actually physically going out, looking at the houses to make sure that there are no additions put on that are not assessed for taxes. And, right now, we talk about technology. They can look at these pictures through an aerial picture, through satellite pictures, and get the information that they need and see if there's anything in there that's inappropriate. But, the other thing that they use, too, are something called specs, which is the market value of homes and how they are selling. And that's supposed to reflect it on how much your house is assessed. But we have assessors, especially in parts where there are huge second home areas up north, maybe where there's a lot of land, a lot of privacy.
Sure.
Where homeowners aren't home, for example. And the assessor, if there's no trespassing sign, will walk on the property, knock on the door. If nobody is there, they will take the liberty to walk around your property.
Do they have that right?
Maybe even take pictures. The courts have upheld it. They haven't, but they said because they have a job to do, they can do it unless you tell them no. And so now there's going to be legislation. They're talking about this that really sets the manual, makes it very clear. You have to have explicit permission to walk on the property to be able to do that.
Now, in fairness,
and so,
in fairness now, if let's say you have a property in northern Michigan. It's a nice property, like you said. It described, a big house, big piece of property. And you're somebody that only shows up 2, 3, 4 weeks out of the year. There has to be some provision in fairness for the local, county or municipality to have some ability to do a tax assessment on occasion. But it's certainly not something they need to do on an annual basis, I wouldn't think. But there would have to be some recourse, I would guess, because, property taxes are the law of the land.
Yeah, and why do we have to have? It's very time consuming, very expensive to send people to physically go out onto property and do that job. Again, why are we not looking at just the two main things, which are the sales comps in the area and the square footage? People when they build big structures do pull permits, and they do have that information. Now the assessors will come back and say, no, there's some people who sneak and they'll put other property structures on there. But heck, if they are big enough, you will see them from a satellite photo. and they're really it's arguably a very expensive process. Not really needed to do what they have to do, which is assess property and get the proper tax on the property.
Well, because I'll be honest with you, I don't like people on my property, and I have found people. I have a small farm in southern Michigan where I have found the people that are most egregious about coming on my property are those that come to work on the power lines, who believe that their property, or my property, is their property, and they'll drive in. They don't care. With these big heavy trucks with dually tires, and they've gotten buried on my property a couple of times, and I'll tell you, it really irritates me, as it should, because they don't stick around to clean up the ruts and the problems and the damage. I get to do that. I realize they have to come through and trim trees so that we don't have blackouts and so forth. I get that, but have some courtesy, have some tact, a little bit anyhow.
Well, yeah, and then we get into the issue of public right-of-way, and I remember years ago the city township came in and ripped up our street to put in water lines, which none of us wanted because we all had wells, and they were just fine. It was going to cost a lot of money to hook up to these water lines.
Yeah.
But they did it anyway. They had that access, so what are you going to do?
I guess that's one of the things that brings out this whole, it kind of reminds me of the eminent domain argument going on in the campaign for president this year, because Donald Trump, a big proponent of eminent domain, and all of these things kind of fall under similar access, I suppose, similar laws with the government. How far does the government have the right to go? How far do entities have the right to go when it's your property? I like the idea.
Well,
of them.
Eminent domain for economic development is a big controversy, and a lot of people don't like it.
No, don't like it at all. Some people have benefited from it, but in that particular conversation, pointing out that the Keystone XL pipeline, it wouldn't go through without eminent domain, and that's a private pipeline. So what do you do? And there's a legitimate discussion to be had there. But I like the idea that the landowner can say, no, I do not want the tax assessor or anybody else on my property when I'm not there. That's why it's my property. It's why I pay taxes in the first place, and I don't need to be subjected to the inspections of government agents, unknown government agents, on a regular event. I'll give you 20 seconds for the last word, Ann.
Well, yeah, you raised a lot of issues. Next time, maybe we can talk more about the speed limit bills that came up last couple of weeks ago, where they've eliminated a very key provision in eliminating speed traps, and it hasn't gone to the House yet, but that's a big deal.
Well, it is a big. If you've got a few more minutes, you could stay a little bit longer, but that's up to you.
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that. I've been writing a lot about that.
Well, sit tight right there, Ann. Sit tight right there. Ann Schieber's with us. And I hate speed traps, so I think we need to talk about it here. And they're talking about raising speed limits. Ann Schieber will be right here from the Mackinac Center right after this on The Steve Gruber Show.
Michigan, born and raised with Midwestern values and Michigan common sense.
All right, welcome back to it. All right, Ann Schieber's still here, Senior Investigative Analyst for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. All right, let's talk about this speed trap enforcement. Here's the thing. The state of Michigan is talking about raising speed limits in a variety of places, but have deferred, the way I've read it, and deferred to some municipalities and the state police to, keep speed limits artificially low, is the way I understood it in some areas. And artificially low speed limits would be, by definition, I think, a speed trap. Am I misunderstanding this?
No, it's not an urban myth. They are very real things. They do bring in a source of revenue for mostly local government, state government. You see them all over the country. We have them here in Michigan. And so we have a package of 5 bills that got out of the House Transportation Committee a week ago, and they eliminated a very key provision in these bills, which was what is called the minimum 75th percentile of speed. So in the bills, the goal was to set all the speed limits at 85 percentile. And what that means is basically setting a speed limit that is not exceeded by 85% of the drivers. It is the speed that most people drive. They feel safe and comfortable, and they drive at that speed. And why that is safe is because it eliminates speed variation. When you set a more realistic speed limit, drivers tend to drive a more consistent speed. When the limit is set too low, you have some people who follow the signs, but not many. And then you have a lot of inconsistent speed. So you get road conflicts, you get people tailgating, cutting people off, and those are the things that cause crashes. So what happened was they were going to say, okay, no speed limits in Michigan can be ever set before the 75th percentile. They even lowered it a little bit. And they wiped out that provision. We will have 80-mile-an-hour speed limits under these bills on rural highways, like I-96 in rural areas, and that will be very reflective of what typical speeds are in Michigan.
I have a question for you. Shouldn't, when I was reading these stories and understanding this, shouldn't it be shouldn't the speed limit be set by the legislature? Maybe some input from safety experts and so forth. But why are we allowing municipalities to set their own artificially low speed limits like this, and the state police to step in and allow this to happen? It doesn't seem equitable to me.
Well, it's home rule. It's giving municipalities their local authority. They have argued that this is what their neighbors want, and I'll tell you, I think that's true. You get a lot of uninformed people on this subject, people who live in these busy areas on busy roads. And the first assumption is the faster limit is the more dangerous limit. And it also creates more noise. They don't like cars on their drove. Sometimes they put these lower speed limits to keep cars off the roads. What happens is motorists don't want to get tickets, so they'll avoid those roads. And, of course, the people who live on those roads think it's great because they don't have cars on their roads anymore. But, many people, these roads existed a lot of times before people moved into those homes. So if you don't want to live in a high-traffic area, don't buy a house in a high-traffic area,
Yeah, it's baffling to me because it just seems that, again, to me, and maybe I'm wrong, it just seems like there's too many people trying to put their finger, and you mentioned the uneducated people. Well, is there a place in American politics or in the world today where people are well-educated? Because if there is, I'd sure like to go there.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation. People are busy, and they don't take the time to really learn about issues. They're
or much of anything.
Sometimes become very emotional and susceptible to advertising, and
they're susceptible to emotion and that and lack of facts and common sense. That would explain the turnout at the Bernie Sanders events. Whoops, there I go again. But come on. How can educated people show up to cheer on Bernie Sanders? Just out of curiosity, Ann, a little aside, what is your fair share of what I earn? I'm just curious.
I want all of it.
Exactly. Apparently, your fair share is whatever I do. We call that democratic socialism. At any rate, so some of the speed limits. I guess the bottom line is this. I mean, I know between, say, Grand Rapids to Lansing to Detroit, that's a very fast stretch of highway, I-96, one of the fastest in the country that I've ever been on, in fact. And so I'm going to guess that some parts of that may get juiced to 80, but when you head north on 75, if you're headed up north to your property, maybe that might get a juice to 80 miles an hour, too. Are these some of the stretches of highway we think are going to get a lot faster?
Yeah, rural freeways. They will have some be able to make the case to lower the speed limit, but they have to do so in a very conscious manner. And so, we talk about speed limits. The fastest highway in the country is in Texas. The speed limit is 85. It's a very brand new highway. And guess what? This is another myth. They keep saying that when you raise the limits, it's going to make the threshold for faster limits even more so. That if you set it at 80, people are going to be driving 90. That's just not true. If you raise it to the 85th percentile, it will go up a little bit, but not a whole lot. So on that really fast highway in Texas, guess what the average speed is? The 85th is 85 miles an hour, 86 miles an hour, actually.
I would guess, yeah. Because there's a point where people are no longer comfortable. People, a lot
You're
of people,
right. It takes an enormous amount of concentration to drive really fast speeds, and most people don't want to do that. They don't get in the car to try to kill themselves. That's really what it's based on.
I must have really exceptional concentration. That's what I'm going to say from now on. I have exceptional concentration. That's why Ann said I've got great concentration, honey. No point in getting upset here. And I greatly appreciate it. Good conversation. When's that going to happen, by the way? I got to run, but how soon do we expect those speed limit signs to go up?
Well, it's got to get through the House, which will probably happen in a couple of weeks, and then it's got to go through the Senate, and it's got to get the signature of the governor. So
No.
It'll be a few months here out.
So sometime maybe by the end of the year. All right, we'll keep an eye on it. Ann Schieber, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There you have it. Senior investigative analyst for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, Ann Schieber here on the program. Yeah, I'm just concentrating exceptionally well. I wasn't speeding, officer. I wasn't doing 105 miles an hour. I was just really focused at the time. It's Monday. We'll be right back.
This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop. Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy!
Been a long education.
Yeah, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
All right, and welcome to it, my friends, here on this Monday. A consequential Monday following this weekend's events, of course. The first work week after the passing of Antonin Scalia, which is the biggest political death in a generation, and that's not overstating it. Coming up next here on the program will be former Congressman Bob Barr of Georgia. He ran for president as a Libertarian. We'll have his thoughts on Scalia and the upcoming South Carolina primary. And a bit later, Matt Briggs will be here to discuss the Clean Power Plan and where we go from here, because the court doctrine, the docket, the doctrine will change, but the docket will be, well, it'll be greatly changed because of what happened, because the death of Antonin Scalia over the weekend in Texas puts America into uncharted territory. Whether you believe it or not, this is uncharted territory. In the midst of a very heated presidential election year, Democrats will try to point in vain to the confirmation of Anthony Kennedy and the final year of Ronald Reagan's presidency as a reason to allow Barack Obama to nominate a Supreme Court justice, but it's different, very different. First, Kennedy was nominated in November of 1987 and confirmed in February of 1988, and only after Democrats had blocked the nomination of Robert Bork during the summer of 1987. These circumstances are very different. You will hear Democrats like Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy howling that the U.S. Senate, which is controlled by Republicans because elections have, that's right, consequences, which is controlled by Republicans, he will say, along with other Democratic senators, but that the Senate must confirm a Supreme Court justice put forth by Barack Obama and then point to the Constitution, something the Democrats care little about on most days. The problem is, for the Democrats, there simply are no requirements and no timetables for the Senate to hold hearings or vote, for that matter, on confirming somebody. There are no timetables to be found in the Constitution. It is highly, sadly amusing and ironic that such rhetoric would even come from Leahy, who has famously said that no nominees should be granted to a lame duck president in the last year of his term. Of course, he only says that when there is a Republican in the White House. His tune and tone very different when it's a Democrat in the Oval Office. The same is true of Lucky Chucky Charlie Schumer, the left extremist from the state of New York. He has already derided and decried the intent of many Senate Republicans to prevent President Barack Obama from appointing a successor to the now deceased Antonin Scalia. But it hasn't been very long when Schumer had a very different look. Right now, he says it's the kind of obstructionism that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is talking about. He's hearkening back to his old days, said Schumer. But yet, when George W. Bush was still president, Schumer advocated almost the exact same approach. Although he advocated it much earlier. During a speech at a convention at the American Constitution Society in July 2007, a year and a half before George W. Bush's term would be done, Schumer said if any Supreme Court vacancies opened up, Democrats should not allow Bush the chance to fill any. Oh, the hypocrisy of it all. The hypocrisy. The bottom line is the United States Senate can take its sweet time to make a move or make no move at all. The nominee, so therefore the president, has to get 60 senators on board for a two-thirds majority, and he may get some Republican votes by pressuring those in tight races, like Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire or Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Both of those Republicans could be in trouble in the races this fall, but the Republican firewall will hold. You see, if it doesn't, voters will send Republicans home in large numbers. We will be all done with the Republicans. All done. The bottom line is they're not going to get the 60 votes. So here's the dilemma for those Republican senators in tight races. They can move forward on a nomination. Not move forward on a nomination and risk upsetting voters in their states like Wisconsin and New Hampshire. And they could lose their seats as a result of not moving forward because they would look like obstructionists. But if they move forward, I can guarantee you they will lose. Because angry Republicans, their base will come out en masse and vote against them. And honestly, what's wrong with letting a new president put up the nominee? If Democrats are so confident Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders are going to win, then it's no big deal. Relax. You'll get the nominee you want anyway. And if the GOP wins, well, it'll be the status quo. But this is an election year, and we have a president that doesn't seem to care much about the rule of law, a guy who is allegedly a constitutional scholar. He was a teaching assistant, boys and girls. Let's not forget he was not a professor. And if I hear him refer to our country as a democracy one more time, I might just scream and put my boot through the TV. It's a republic, boys and girls. It is not a democracy. But, he was a constitutional scholar. No, clearly, he doesn't understand the basic tenets of the Constitution. Anyhow, what does this all mean in the short run? Scalia's death? Well, any votes that are deadlocked at 4-4 will revert to the lower court ruling, and that favors Republicans in the short term. It means tougher abortion laws in Texas will stand. It means a crackdown on executive orders on immigration will stand. However, it means, I believe, that the Clean Power Plan will be back on track. And what about a recess appointment? The only time the president tried this and got shot down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional was Scalia voting that his recess appointments to the National Labor Relations Board were unconstitutional because no recess existed. But there is a window, I believe, between the 3rd of January and the 20th of January 2017 where he could put in a recess appointment. It's still trying to figure that one out. Politics can be messy in America. It's the way it was designed by the framers of the Constitution. The battle lines are now being drawn. The falsehoods are already being thrown out and thrown about. And the sad thing is most Americans that vote don't know enough about the Constitution to pass a 5th grade history test. And that's true. And that's sad. But like I said, make no mistake, Antonin Scalia's death, the most consequential political death in a generation. That is certainly true, and there is no doubt it is an unprecedented event in American political history, no matter what Democrats or others might try to tell you. Straight ahead, former Congressman Barr of Georgia will join us, a man who ran for president as a libertarian, an outspoken person on the right. Straight ahead on this Monday on The Steve Gruber Show.
Keeping you in touch with Michigan and the world.
All right, it's Monday on the program. Welcome back to it. Very consequential weekend in American politics, to say the least. Our next guest, Barr, former federal prosecutor, former member of the United States House of Representatives. He represented Georgia's 7th congressional district from 1995 to 2003, and then he skipped out and became an independent. Then he became a libertarian, ran for president as a Libertarian, and then he came back to the Republican Party. Colorful political career, to say the least. Bob Barr, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. I'm heading up to South Carolina from Atlanta right now.
Speaking of political fireworks, and we'll get to that, obviously the death of Antonin Scalia over the weekend, I consider it to be the most significant death in American politics in a generation. His impact on America and the courts and so forth cannot be understated. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think it's a very accurate statement. This man really was the anchor for the constitutional scholars in America. He was the real foundation for those who understand the Constitution and understand that it must be interpreted in today's world, as in every day, according to what the framers had in mind, why they said what they did, why they did what they did.
So when you look at his death, it is unprecedented in American history, although the Democrats are trying to tell us that, well, Ronald Reagan got Anthony Kennedy confirmed in 1988, the last year of his presidency. The fact of the matter is Kennedy was nominated the year before in November, a full year before the election, and only because Robert Bork had taken political attacks that had sunk his nomination in the summer of '87. So this really is unprecedented. And what do you think the right move is for the United States Senate right now?
The right move for the United States Senate is to grow some backbone and stand up to the Harry Reids. I mean, Harry Reid sometimes, to me, seems to still be serving as majority leader, the way the Democrats are basically calling the agenda.
Exactly what I have said.
What the Republicans need to do is to recognize that if they allow President Obama to have his way and to put a liberal on the Supreme Court, it will affect laws and policies in this country for 20 or 30 or 35 years. They have a responsibility not to let that happen.
To keep a balance on the court, I agree with that. So now we head to South Carolina, and the Republican voters will be going to the polls, I believe, this coming Saturday. 7 candidates still in the mix, not all of which are viable. Bob Barr, who do you support in the South Carolina primary?
I'm a very strong supporter of Senator Ted Cruz. I've been very impressed ever since this man was elected to the Senate a few years ago that he not only understands the Constitution, but has the backbone to stand up to the establishment in order to fight for the Constitution, fight against NSA warrantless surveillance and for the privacy rights of Americans, to stand up against federal spending. So I'm very proud to support Ted Cruz.
So when you look at Cruz, the knocks on Cruz heading into this election on Saturday are that he can't get much support. He has no endorsements from his Senate colleagues, and he is lacking support, and that he might be unelectable. Well, what do you say to that?
I say I care more about what the voters and the people of this country think than other United States senators. The vast majority of senators are establishment quo public officials. They believe that a junior senator like Ted Cruz ought to be seen and not heard. They would prefer that Ted Cruz just sit on the back bench like most of them did and do nothing for 6 or 12 years before they throw you some leadership crumbs. The fact of the matter is, one of the reasons I like Ted Cruz is because he stands up to the Senate establishment, not because he is a member of it.
Because he doesn't roll over to it. We're on the line with Bob Barr, former congressman from the state of Georgia and former Libertarian Party nominee. But you came back and joined the Republican Party and left the Libertarian Party, I believe, in 2011. Why the change of heart?
Well, it wasn't my heart that changed. The Republican Party has gone through several transformations in recent years. Back in the mid and late 1990 or 2000s, under the Bush presidency, the Republican Party strayed very far from its conservative roots when it started this warrantless spying on American citizens, for example, and the tremendous overspending, blowing a hole in the balanced budget that we passed when I was in the House. And the Libertarian Party offered at that time a viable alternative. Unfortunately, the Libertarian Party has not grown into a real viable third party, and the Republican Party, at this election cycle in particular, has really refound its roots as the true conservative party in America, as long as we can overcome the establishment.
Now, having said that, I guess my question to you would be the same as it would be to a lot of folks. If Donald Trump remains in first place and ends up with the nomination, Bob Barr, are you a supporter of Donald Trump as the nominee?
I am not a supporter of somebody whose philosophy and whose entire adult record is alien to the Republican Party. I am not a supporter of somebody who claims to be a conservative and yet throughout their entire career has not adhered to Republican or conservative principles.
So what would you do then? You would not vote for Trump if he was the Republican nominee?
No, I would. I don't buy into this notion that we should support somebody for president, even though we don't agree with them or believe that they would make a good president. Certainly, never could vote for Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or Hillary or whoever the Democrats put up. But what I will continue to do is to fight for conservative principles in various forums, in various Senate races and House races.
Puts you in a difficult position, potentially, Bob Barr, no question about it. And I greatly appreciate you coming by, and I'd love to talk to you again in the future because you have a fascinating and colorful political history. So good luck on the road there to South Carolina. We'll keep an eye on your Senator Ted Cruz, of course. Bob Barr, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Bob Barr, former Georgia congressman, former Libertarian presidential candidate. Where else do you get things like this except on the Steve Gruber Show?
Covering Michigan and the world from his bunker below the bridge. Here is Steve Gruber.
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
In the fog of everything else, we forget about pressing issues and things that face us every day. Were you listening the other day when I mentioned that when Al Gore left the vice presidency in January of 2001, he was worth about $1.7 million. $1.7 million. And as you recall, in 2012, Mitt Romney was the rich guy. Oh, my, he's a rich guy. He makes too much. You know what Al Gore's worth today? $350 million. In 15 years, he's gone from being worth about $1.5 million to $350 million. Don't tell me climate change doesn't pay. Pays really well if you make discredited movies. An Inconvenient Truth. It's an inconvenient movie because, well, so much of it has been disproven now. Things that Al Gore said were going to happen, dire predictions, just failed to come true. My next guest is the smartest idiot you'll ever hear. His name's Matt Briggs. He has a master's of science in atmospheric physics. He also has a degree in meteorology. He has his doctorate in mathematical statistics from Cornell, but yet, in the world of global climate change discussions, he's treated like an idiot because he doesn't buy into the whole doom and gloom climate change narrative. Matt Briggs, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, the smartest dumb guy you'll ever hear. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I mean, you get treated as if you're some sort of a dunce, I suppose, for lack of a better term. But really, I mean, you study the stuff your entire life. Tell me about, isn't it interesting that Al Gore has gone from $1.5 million to $350 million on the back of that movie, Inconvenient Truth, with so many of those things in there have proven just not to be true?
Yeah, he started out as a socialist and ended as an unrepentant capitalist. He turned all this stuff into an enormous scheme to generate himself tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on this carbon trading scheme that he developed, the movies, speaking fees, everything else. And if you remember, the deadline just passed. He made, 10, 15 years ago. He said we only had whatever it was, 10
years.
years.
Yeah, just passed.
To save the planet from doom. and that this was it. And it was just, a couple of days ago, and yet we're still here talking.
Well, yeah, and the kids wouldn't even know what snow was anymore. Things like, by the way, it's been snowing a lot lately in Michigan, a lot. And you might have heard there's a big blizzard in New York City this year, and D.C., and they might be getting hit again. It's incredible to me that human beings can look right out their window and see the truth and see it with their own eyes, and they can feel it and smell it and touch it. And yet if some guy gets on the TV and proselytizes about global warming, they go, oh, well, Al Gore said the whole world's going to end. It must be true. How on earth are people that dumb?
Well, they believe authority, I suppose, whatever the government tells them. It's not so much that people believe in global warming. Everybody can clearly see that the predictions of doom that they have been making almost for, 40, 50 years now, if you include the global cooling craze back in the late 70s and the population explosion stuff of the 60s, they could look and see that none of the predictions of doom have materialized.
Not one.
The solution to these faux problems, the solution to all of these things that were going to kill us all, they really believe in. They really want the solution to these things, which is, of course, increased governmental control over every possible aspect of your life.
Absolutely true. In fact, in the new budget that just came out from President Obama, I don't have the name of this little community in front of me, there's a town of about 350 natives in Alaska on an Aleutian sand island out there in the middle of the ocean, right? And erosion has destroyed this town. In fact, it's moved twice in the past because, the big waves from big storms erode the sand away, so they end up moving. But they're attributing this now to rising oceans and climate change. They set aside $400 million in the new budget to move a town of 350 people. It's like the poster child of global warming. I'm like, how on earth do you do this? Listen, we're going into a global recession possibly right now. What's going to happen, Doctor, when we go into this, and the money's just not there for all these schemes and scams, and it really is a climate Ponzi scheme. It really is. What's going to happen to all these little pet projects when the global economy turns south?
Oh, boy. Given the government's previous history, I'm imagining that they'll still be funded. I can't see the government cutting back on any of its expenditures. That's why our debt is skyrocketing. So I don't think anything would happen to them per se. The danger is we need to stop them from creating new embellishments. Like Obama had, was it last week or the week before, proposed a new additional $10 a barrel tax on oil. And he would take that money, your money, which would you pay for, and increase fuel costs, increase automobile costs, increase food costs, increase everything costs, and give it to his cronies who would build these so-called clean energy plants.
No, I know. I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, which is what this is the whole thing. It's a terrible, old, boring story, but it all comes down to money. Who's benefiting from all this?
Yeah, all the weasels in the back room.
If they didn't have all of these things to sell, if they didn't have these solar plants and wind farms and these kinds of things to sell, there would be no global warming crisis because the government would have no interest in propping it up.
I think it predates that, actually. Karl Marx in his writings, put Mother Earth as one of the tenets of how you control a population. You put the Earth, and so in effect, climate change, global warming, is just an updated version of what Marx laid out to begin with on how to control populations through Marxist thought. Now, climate change is real, Doctor, and we know that. We're with Dr. Matt Briggs here on the program. I mean, because it gave us things like the Great Lakes. It gave us things like the Mississippi River. These things came from global warming. So who's to say global warming is a bad thing? That's number one. Number two, let's talk about real science and the science that you do when it comes to, mathematical statistics. For example, Earth temperatures and monitoring Earth temperatures. The best way to do that, my understanding, is from satellite, not from ground stations, from satellites. And when you look at satellite readings of surface temperatures around the world over the last many years, Doctor, what do people find? What do scientists like yourself find?
Well, you're exactly right. The ground-based measurements are good, but they're not universal, and they tend to move over time. They tend to change instrumentation methods over time. Cities grow up around them. Parking lots go up around them. So we don't really trust as much the surface-based measurements. Satellite-based measurements are better. Nothing is perfect, but they're better. And what the satellites have shown is that over the past 20 years or so, the temperature in some years it goes up and in some years it goes down, but it has remained relatively flat over that period, which is to say no increase, no global warming. Yet the predictions that are being made by the theories that carbon dioxide is an evil gas have said the temperature should have increased wildly by now. The difference between the models, the theory, and reality is growing wider and wider and wider with every year. Yet we're supposed to ignore the reality and embrace the theory.
It's always a great conversation. Matt Briggs, PhD in mathematical statistics from Cornell, atmospheric physics degrees in meteorology. You are a breath of fresh air, Matt, and I always appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
There you have it. Yeah, I can only offer the truth so many times. I can lead your horse to water, but I can't make him think. It's the Steve Gruber Show.
The Steve Gruber Show. American values with Midwestern common sense.
Monday, so good to me. Monday morning.
Here's how critical things are. Here's how critical things are. You know, and I see these silly pop-ups on Facebook and elsewhere, but I'm going to read you one from Occupy Democrats, because you see this garbage out there all the time, and it's got a picture of Barack and Michelle Obama. Cheers to our haters. In just 7 years, we cut unemployment in half, nearly tripled the stock market, slashed the deficit by 3/4, helped 20 million Americans afford health insurance, oversaw the expansion of marriage equality to the entire nation, saved the American car industry, ended Iran's nuclear program, and got bin Laden. The truth is, our debt is now over $19 trillion, the military in disarray, and things are so bad out there that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are the leading candidates for president of the United States. Real unemployment is 10% or higher. 95 million able-bodied people aren't working. 50 million get food stamps, and household income has fallen every year for 7 straight. The percentage of home ownership is at its lowest point in a generation, while the government is spying on pretty much all of us. Occupy this. All right, let's get some truth out there. Meanwhile, Justin Antonin Scalia dies, and trust me, it made me sick to my stomach when I realized that Antonin Scalia was dead, as it did for most Americans that care about the Constitution, because most of the liberal appointees to the Supreme Court seem to have no interest in the Constitution, believe it's a living, breathing document. I guess laws are living and breathing too, because the Constitution is a series of laws, is it not? And therefore, shouldn't you just say the next time you get a speeding ticket, well, it's a living, breathing speed limit. More people drive fast today than they did 10 years ago, so, the speed limit should apply to me, and therefore I should not get a ticket. That's the mentality applied here. That's the logic. Socrates just flipped in his grave and said, what? Yeah. So you're going to hear a lot of nonsense. A lot of nonsense in the days and weeks and months to come about this vacancy on the Supreme Court. Democrats are going to say it's the constitutional obligation of the United States Senate for Republicans to confirm the nominee put forward by Barack Obama. Not really. The Supreme Court has operated with as few as 6 justices. Immediately after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, they allowed the court to atrophy from 9 justices to 7. Then they put it back to 10. Why did they let it go to 7, by the way? Because nobody wanted to allow Andrew Johnson a chance to nominate justices to the Supreme Court. People like Patrick Leahy and Chuck Schumer, Democrats, by the way, liberal Democrats, in the past have openly advocated what they call the Thurman Rule, which is basically a lame duck president in the last year of his presidency should not get any judicial appointments through. Of course, their tune changes now with this unprecedented death of Antonin Scalia, and they will tell you that it is the U.S. Senate's responsibility and constitutional responsibility to put through these nominations, which is simply not true. There is no formula for a timeline or for the responsibilities. Quite simply put, the Republicans have no responsibility or obligation to have hearings or confirm any member of the Supreme Court, now or ever. And as long as the Republicans are in charge, I suppose they could go literally for years. I don't see, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong here. And I'm trying to get some constitutional scholars on here, actual constitutional scholars, not alleged, fictitious constitutional scholars like the President of the United States, who continues to refer to our country as a democracy. Of course, he also made the comment that he had visited all 57 states at some point. Maybe he likes Heinz 57, but the last time I checked, Mr. President, the most states we've ever had is 50. But you go ahead and visit all 57. Can you imagine if a Republican had said that? Anyhow, you're going to hear all of these political attacks. So the bottom line is this. Many people knew how important the Supreme Court was coming into this election. It is now front and center. It might be the single most important topic today for this election. Now, of course, that's subject to change if there's a terrorist attack or the economy tanks, which it could. A lot of people predicting that 2016 will see this economy go into a nosedive, into a recession worse than we've seen before because they can't prop it up anymore. Some European banks are into the unprecedented idea of negative interest rates, meaning if you put $100 in the bank today and take it out in a year, you'll get $99 back, or $98 or $97, negative interest. But you won't lose the value of all your money. You'll lose a percentage of your money. If that were the case, wouldn't you just get cash and leave it in under the bed? So you're going to hear all of these things, but make no mistake, right now, the single most important thing facing the electors in South Carolina, in Nevada, on Super Tuesday, here in Michigan on March the 8th, the single biggest issue facing us now is what kind of a Supreme Court justice is appointed to this court. It will affect us for a generation. You have other justices of the Supreme Court. They're also in failing health. Justice Thomas, Justice Ginsburg, both old. Both, there would be no surprise if they faded away soon. No question about it. You'll hear all of these things going forward, and we will continue to discuss them here, of course. The most consequential death of a political figure of any sort, even though the judges in the Supreme Court are supposed to be non-political, it certainly is. This hour of the Steve Gruber Show has been brought to you by the Michigan 529 programs, making sure your kids and grandkids get the education they need. To learn more, go to SaveWithMI529.com.